She was nobody special. That, at least, was the general consensus on the fourth-floor ward of the Hunter Holmes McGuire VA Medical Center. Tegan Byrne had worked there for 3 years. She came in early, stayed late, answered call lights before they finished their second chime, and knew every veteran on the floor by first name and by wound. The rotating residents had different theories about her. Some guessed she was a former ER nurse burned out by city trauma work. Others figured she was just one of those nurses, the kind who chose the VA specifically because the pace was slower, the politics quieter, the expectations contained. She blended into the background the way certain people do when they've spent a long time not wanting to be seen. Nobody looked too closely at the paradoxes. Nobody noticed that her hands had never trembled, not once, not even during the code blue in room 4111 when the attending physician froze, and 3 nurses dissolved into panic, and Byrne had simply taken over, calm, precise, calling medications and compressions with the vocal tone of someone who had done this in far worse conditions than a fluorescent-lit ward. Nobody noticed the way her gray-green eyes cataloged every room she entered. Exits first, then the occupants, then the instruments. Nobody noticed that when the night orderlies moved too fast in the corridors, they unconsciously slowed down when they passed her, as if something in the way she held herself told their nervous systems. This is someone who does not lose her composure. She was just a floor nurse. Philip Norcross arrived in February. His title was Director of Administrative Operations, which sounded important, but in practice meant he had been brought in by the regional VA authority to optimize resource allocation, which everybody on staff understood to mean cut costs, reduce redundancies, and report back to people with offices in glass buildings who had never set foot on a hospital ward. Norcross had an MBA from Wharton and a background in healthcare consulting, which made him extremely confident about things he did not fully understand. He wore his authority like a freshly laundered blazer. He spoke in the measured, slightly performative cadence of someone who had learned to manage rooms rather than people. Within his first 2 weeks, he had restructured the nursing staff's scheduling system without consulting a single nurse, reduced the morning medication window by 20 minutes, and removed 2 of the 3 break room microwaves to free up space for a new administrative filing station. He was not malicious, precisely. He was something almost worse, certain. The morning everything came apart began the way most critical mornings do at the VA, without warning, with speed, and with a large quantity of blood. The patient was a 63-year-old veteran named Raymond Holton. Colonel Holton, retired, Army, Special Forces, 3 combat deployments across 2 decades, and a left knee reconstructed twice by military surgeons who'd done excellent work, and a right side that had never quite healed from the IED strike in Kandahar in 2011. He came in that Tuesday through emergency intake, unresponsive, with a blood pressure reading that made the triage nurse swear under her breath. Internal bleeding, origin unknown, suspected abdominal. His admission paperwork listed next of kin as one Mark Holton, Brigadier General, currently stationed at the Pentagon. By the time the gurney reached the 4th-floor surgical prep bay, the situation had escalated past what the admitting resident felt equipped to manage. Dr. Joel Tamblin was 29 years old and extraordinarily bright and knew, in the way that honest young doctors sometimes do, exactly where the outer limit of his experience sat. He had good instincts. What he lacked was the kind of automatic calm that only comes from making life or death decisions in places with no backup. Byrne was already there when they wheeled Holton in. She had been restocking the IV supply cart at the far end of the bay when she heard the gurney, heard the triage readout, and crossed the room without hurrying and without hesitation. Her eyes swept the colonel's vitals on the portable monitor. She reached past a startled medical student and positioned her fingers at Holton's wrist, feeling for his pulse herself, not trusting the readout. Tamblyn. Her voice was flat and direct. His pressure is dropping. He's got guarding in the right upper quadrant. I think you're looking at a splenic laceration that didn't present on the first scan. You need to get ahead of this before he's too far down to bring back. Tamblyn looked at her. He'd worked with Byrne for 6 months. He trusted her the way a sailor trusts a current. What do you need? 2 large bore lines cross-match him now and tell me the moment you have a surgeon available. Who authorized that? The voice came from the corridor doorway, and it carried the particular quality of a person who had never once been told to wait. Philip Norcross stood in the entrance to the prep bay, his blazer crisp, his expression arranged into administrative displeasure. He had been doing a floor walk, one of his new habits intended to demonstrate oversight, and he had heard raised voices and made the decision to investigate. He looked at the controlled chaos of the bay. He looked at the gurney. He looked at Byrne's hands on the colonel's arm. Step away from the patient, please. He wasn't shouting. He delivered it the way he delivered most directives, as a reasonable request that happened to also be an order. I want to understand the chain of authorization here. We have protocols for unscheduled surgical interventions. And I'm not seeing the attending physician in command of this situation. Dr. Tamblyn is the attending. Byrne didn't look up. She was threading the second IV line with the steadiness of a woman doing something she had done 1,000 times in worse lighting, in smaller spaces, in much louder environments. And I need you to step back from the sterile field. The request hit Norcross the wrong way. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry, I don't think I caught your name. Byrne. Nurse Byrne. The title was deliberate, a reminder of hierarchy. I'm going to need you to step back and let Dr. Tamblyn proceed through standard. Standard triage won't keep him alive. Byrne finally looked up. Her eyes met Norcross's with an absolute absence of anxiety. He's hemorrhaging into his abdomen. Tamblyn knows what to do. I'm helping him do it faster. That's the only conversation that matters right now. Something moved across Norcross's face, an unfamiliar sensation, the precursor to being ignored by someone who was not afraid of him. Dr. Tamblyn. Norcross turned his attention. I'm directing you to proceed with standard protocol and to manage your nursing staff accordingly. Tamblyn's hands hesitated over the patient. He was 29 years old, and watching his administrative director issue a direct instruction that was wrong. And he knew it was wrong, and the knowing sat very badly in his chest. Byrne spoke before he had to. Right upper quadrant, there. She had positioned the portable ultrasound wand with her free hand, and the image on the small screen was unambiguous to anyone with training. A dark pooling shadow behind the spleen, the unmistakable signature of active bleeding. Joel, prep and clamp. Now. Tamblyn moved. Norcross's voice went very cold. Nurse Byrne, this is your final. You can write me up when he's stable. Her voice did not rise. It did not shake. It carried the exhausted certainty of someone who had been in rooms that were trying to kill everyone inside them and had made the same choice every single time. Right now, I need you out of my sterile field. Norcross left the bay, but but he did not leave the floor. He stood in the corridor, watching through the small rectangular window as Byrne guided Tamblin's hands and called medications and kept the colonel's pressure from bottoming out through some combination of skill and sheer will. His jaw was a hard, unhappy line. He was cataloging everything: the insubordination, the unauthorized directives, the complete disregard for the chain of authority he had spent 2 months carefully constructing. When the gurney finally moved toward the surgical elevator, heading upstairs where actual surgeons would take over the repair work, Byrne had bought them time to do. Norcross was waiting. He followed her to the supply room at the end of the corridor. She was stripping her gloves and running the sink, scrubbing her forearms the way she always did after a procedure. Methodical, thorough, the water turning pink for a moment before running clear. He closed the door behind him. "What you just did," he began, "constitutes gross insubordination, unauthorized clinical direction, and a direct violation of the administrative protocols I implemented for this facility." Byrne turned off the tap. She reached for the paper towels, took 3, dried her hands without rushing. "I understand you feel that way." The equanimity of it made something tighten behind his eyes. "I don't just feel it, I'm documenting it. You overrode the attending physician's authority in a critical patient bay and refused a direct order from your administrative superior. Do you understand what that means for your employment here?" "I understand what it means for the patient." She turned around, leaned back against the sink, arms crossed loosely, looking at him with those gray-green eyes that didn't seem to contain any of the emotions he'd expected. No defiance, no fear. Something quieter and more difficult to categorize. "Colonel Holton is in surgery right now instead of in cardiac arrest. That's the outcome that mattered." Norcross took a step forward. He was taller than she was by several inches, and he used the height the way men like him often did, not quite looming, but adjacent to it. "You are a floor nurse. This is a VA facility. You work within the structure I administer. You do not override physicians. You do not countermand my directives, and you do not speak to me the way you did in that bay. Am I being clear?" "You're being clear. Then you understand that I'll be submitting a formal recommendation to the regional director for your immediate termination, effective." "Why did you come to work here?" The question landed oddly. Norcross blinked. "Excuse me?" Byrne's voice was quiet, but didn't lack for weight. "You went to Wharton. You had a consulting career. You've been at 3 healthcare systems in 5 years. You could be anywhere. Why a VA facility?" He stared at her. "That's not remotely relevant, too. Those men on this floor." Her voice dropped just slightly. Not in volume, but in register, the way a sound changes quality in a small room. "They came home from places that don't exist in official records. Some of them can't sleep. Some of them can't eat. Some of them have been waiting 14 months for a benefits decision, and spent last Tuesday sitting in the parking garage because the ward felt too enclosed." She held his gaze. "Colonel Holton has been my patient since October. I know what his granddaughter's name is, and what his blood type is, and that he's allergic to cephalosporins, which is not in his intake form, but is in the handwritten note I put in his physical chart 6 weeks ago. That's why the surgical team upstairs isn't going to kill him with the wrong antibiotic." She paused. "You came here to optimize resource allocation. I came here to keep people alive. Those are different jobs, and right now yours nearly got in the way of mine." Norcross was not a small man in terms of ego, but something about the steadiness of her voice in that supply room made the room feel slightly tilted, like a table with one short leg he hadn't noticed until just now. He recovered. He was practiced at it. "That's a very moving speech," he said, his voice going flat and professional again, which was how he sharpened it. "But it doesn't change what I'm doing, and it doesn't change what you are. You're an at-will employee with no clinical directorship, no attending credentials, and no standing to issue orders in a surgical prep bay. So I want to know, and I want a straight answer. What exactly gives you the authority to act the way you did today?" Byrne was quiet for a moment. She reached into the breast pocket of her scrubs. Her fingers closed around something small and heavy, the kind of object that wears a groove in a pocket over years of being carried. She brought it out and held it flat in her palm, facing him. It was a challenge coin, about the size of a silver dollar, matte black, heavier than it looked. On the face, a caduceus crossed at the center with a broken-bladed combat knife. Around the edge, in small, precise letters, "Joint Special Operations Command, Surgical Element." She tilted it toward him so he could read the reverse. A date in 2017, a location code that meant nothing to civilians, and embossed at the center, the presidential seal. Beneath it, "For extraordinary valor under hostile fire, Hell-manned province." Norcross looked at the coin. His expression had arranged itself into mild dismissal. The look of a man preparing to say that could be anything. Then his eyes found the letters beneath the seal. The dismissal didn't come. His mouth opened slightly and closed again. "That's," he stopped. "A presidential unit citation," Byrne said. She wasn't showing off. She said it the way you state a fact that has already been established. The JSOC surgical element was a 6-person team. We went where regular combat medics couldn't reach and performed field surgery under conditions that would fail most operating rooms. I was team lead for 2 years. She closed her fingers around the coin and slid it back into her pocket. "I retired as a Chief Warrant Officer 3. I came here because the VA has the highest ratio of complex trauma patients with the lowest nursing support in the country, and these men deserve better than average." Her voice stayed level. "That's what gives me the authority, Director. The 2 decades I spent earning it." The supply room was very quiet. Philip Norcross's face had moved through several distinct phases in 30 seconds. And now it had arrived at something new. The pale, slightly glassy expression of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about the room he was standing in. He left without saying what he had come to say. In his office with the door closed, he pulled up the VA personnel database and typed in Byrne Tegan. What he expected was a routine file. What appeared was a half-blank page with a red header. "Access restricted. Classification level A please. All inquiries flagged." Below it, dates of service, honorable discharge, final rank. Chief Warrant Officer 3. Deployment history, redacted. Awards, redacted. Commendations, redacted. Everything that mattered gone behind black bars. He picked up the phone and called Gerald Kinsey, the regional VA director. He explained the situation in the measured tones of someone who believed they were being reasonable. He used words like insubordination and misrepresentation and falsified credentials. There was a pause on the other end when he said the name. Philip. Kinsey's voice had shifted into something harder, the way ground shifts before an earthquake, subtle but unmistakable once you've felt it. "Stop talking. Listen." Norcross listened. The JSOC surgical element she served with had a citation that went to the National Security Council for review. She turned down a commission to 04, because she didn't want a desk. She has turned down the clinical director position at 2 separate facilities because she wanted to work the floor. She is at that VA by choice. She could be anywhere, a pause that carried weight. If I receive documentation from you regarding any adverse employment action taken against Tegan Byrne, I will have that documentation reviewed by people who will not enjoy reading it. Are we clear? The phone call ended. Norcross sat in his office for a long time. Downstairs in the break room, Byrne sat with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The confrontation hadn't frightened her. It had tired her in the particular way of having to explain, once again, why she was where she was, to someone who couldn't understand why a person with her record would choose this. Tamblyn came in looking wrung out but relieved. "He's out of surgery," he said. "Splenic laceration. Exactly where you said. They got it cleaned up. He's in recovery." Byrne nodded. "Good. You were right about the cephalosporins. It was in your chart note." "I know." He sat across from her. After a moment he got up, poured himself a coffee, and left her to it. The Black Hawk came in at 4:15. It landed on the VIP helipad on the west side of the building, which triggered an alert that went to the hospital director's phone, the regional director's office, and 3 different security stations. Black Hawk arrivals at VA facilities were not common. They meant someone with access to military transport had decided that waiting was not an option. Brigadier General Mark Holton came through the main access corridor, flanked by 1 aide and 1 security officer in his service uniform, moving with the ground-eating stride of a man who planned operations for a living. He was in his early 50s, squared-shouldered, with the same assessing brown eyes his father had, and the expression of someone who had been in a briefing at the Pentagon when the call came in and had simply left it. Tamblyn met him at the elevator bank, walked him through the surgical outcome: stable, clean repair, strong prognosis. The general listened, then said, "I need to speak to the nurse who intervened before you could operate." Tamblyn glanced down the corridor, as if on cue, because the timing of hospitals is its own kind of choreography. Byrne came through the doors of the 4th-floor ward at the far end, heading toward the nurse's station with a chart in her hand. Same worn scrubs, same no-nonsense bun, the same unhurried walk that never quite looked like slowness, because the ground she covered was always exactly the right amount. General Holton turned and saw her from 40 feet away. He stopped walking. Norcross, who had come out of his office and was hovering near the nurse's station with a tablet in his hand, watched the general's face and did not immediately understand what he saw there. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition, the particular kind that carries history behind it. Holton crossed the distance between them at a pace that wasn't a general's measured stride. It was closer to the way people move when they've been waiting on news, and the news is finally good. Byrne had looked up from the chart. She'd seen him coming. She held still. "Byrne." His voice was not loud, it carried anyway. "General Holton. You were there when my father came in." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with an expression doing a great deal of complicated work, gratitude, recognition, the particular grief-adjacent feeling of realizing how close something came. "I pulled your file on the way here," he said, "or tried to. Most of it's still locked." Most of it usually is. Helmand. 2017. You held a defensive position while maintaining a surgical intervention simultaneously. 4 hours without evac. He paused. "My father served with your commanding officer's mentor back in '09. used to tell stories about that mission after the citation cleared review. Said there was a medic. Quiet, didn't make a fuss about it afterward. Who solved two impossible problems at the same time because there was nobody else. Burns' expression shifted. Not into emotion exactly, but into the memory of it, the way a landscape looks when the light changes and you see it differently. It wasn't as remarkable as it sounds in the write-up, she said. The perimeter was already gone. I just did what needed doing. You always do, he said. There was no condescension in it, just the flat recognition of something true. Then he turned. Norcross had been standing 8 feet away, near the nurse's station, in the configuration of a man who has understood in stages that he has made a significant error. The tablet in his hand was no longer recording anything. General Holton looked at him with the unhurried attention of someone who has read a situation report and confirmed its accuracy in person. Director Norcross. General Norcross straightened involuntarily. Sir, I want to assure you that your father received the highest standard of care under my direct oversight. I personally ensured that. I know what care he received. The general's voice was not raised. I also know that at approximately 11:40 this morning, you entered a surgical prep bay during an active critical intervention and instructed the clinical staff to stand down from a procedure that was keeping my father alive. He looked at the tablet in Norcross's hands. I know you subsequently attempted to access a restricted personnel file. And I know you placed a call to the regional director with the intent to terminate a decorated combat veteran who was, at the time of your call, the reason my father's heart was still beating. He paused. Is that an accurate account? Norcross opened his mouth. Then, in an unusual exercise of wisdom, he closed it. Protocol, General Holton said, exists to protect patients. When it becomes a mechanism for asserting administrative authority over clinical judgment in a critical intervention, it has failed its purpose. And so has the administrator applying it. His voice did not change temperature. It was the steady cold of someone who does not need volume to be heard. I'm going to be speaking to the regional director this afternoon. I'm going to recommend a full review of the directives you've implemented here since February. And I want to be clear about the finding that review is going to reach. The hallway was very quiet. The nurses at the station had stopped pretending to look at their screens. The aide flanking the general had the expression of someone who had witnessed this category of conversation before and was treating it as background. Norcross looked at Byrne, who was looking at the floor, not in deference, but in the manner of someone who has heard enough of this and is already thinking about the next task. She had no interest in watching it unfold. She'd seen it before, in different rooms with different actors, and it always ended the same way. You can go, Director, General Holton said. He said it quietly. Philip Norcross went. He walked down the corridor with the stiff, careful steps of a man preserving his composure by sheer mechanical effort. The elevator doors opened and closed behind him. 3 days later, he was reassigned to an administrative role in the Regional Procurement Office in Indianapolis. The memo framed it as a lateral transition. Nobody on the 4th floor believed that. The atmosphere changed within hours, not because anyone celebrated, but because the air pressure did what it does when a source of compression is removed. The staff moved more freely. The break room got its microwave back. The scheduling system quietly reverted to its previous format. A week after the surgery, Colonel Raymond Holton had recovered enough to be moved to a room with a window, He was sitting up when Byrne came in on a Tuesday morning to review his chart and check his drainage output. He had the kind of face that had spent decades in weather. Creased, direct, permanently squinting at something in the middle distance. He watched her work with the careful attention of a man who had learned to assess competence from a long distance. "My son told me who you are," Holton said. "Your son talks too much." She was checking the drainage line, efficient, not looking up. A rough sound came out of him that was almost a laugh, then stopped being one when it pulled at his incision. "He said you were at Hellmand. 17. Your son has access to files above his pay grade. He's a general. He has access to everything." The colonel was quiet for a moment. "I knew a man in the JSOC medical rotation. Good man. Careful. Didn't waste words. He told me once about a surgical tech who held a perimeter with a 9mm while maintaining pressure on a femoral bleed with her other hand. Said she told everyone to stop being dramatic about it afterward." Byrne set the chart on the side table. Ramos needed the pressure maintained, and someone needed to hold the south side. Those were the two problems. I solved both of them. Holton looked at her for a long time. "It's still remarkable," he said quietly. "You just don't talk about it that way." She picked up the chart again. "Your drainage looks good. I want to step down the pain management protocol in 48 hours. You'll be mobile by Friday if you cooperate. And if I don't cooperate, then you'll be here longer and I'll have to see more of you, which isn't something either of us should want." The rough sound came out of him again, slower this time, careful around the incision. Then he said, more quietly, "You know why you're here, don't you? At this hospital." She didn't look up. "I'm here because there are 43 veterans on this floor who need competent nursing care." "You're here," Holton said, "because people like us don't know how to stop." He said it without self-pity, without drama, the way you state something that has simply been true for a long time. "We can take off the uniform. We can go home. But the mission doesn't stop. It just changes address." Byrne stood still for a moment, with the chart in her hands. She looked at the window. The light was thin and flat. The kind of winter light that doesn't promise anything. She thought about the supply room and Norcross's face, and the coin in her pocket that she'd been carrying for 9 years. She thought about Ramos and the south perimeter and the particular quality of silence after the evac finally came in. The way the world compresses and then expands again. And the first thing you notice is that you're still breathing. "Get some rest, Colonel," she said. "You've got a long PT schedule ahead of you." She walked out into the corridor. The overhead pager crackled to life. "Code trauma, Bay 2. Incoming medevac transfer. Multiple casualties, ETA 4 minutes. All available surgical support to the Bay." Tegan Byrne tucked the chart under her arm and turned left toward the stairwell, moving with the unhurried precision of someone who had been doing this since before the paramedics on that medevac were old enough to drive. The coin shifted in her pocket as she pushed through the stairwell door. A small, familiar weight that had kept company through worse than this. She ran down toward the Bay, toward the noise and the chaos that was the only kind of quiet that had ever made sense to her, and the door swung shut behind her.